I'm at Meadowlands Fishery today, and I'm going to give you 10 tips on how to keep bites coming during these really cold months that we've got coming up. So I use ground bait a lot when I'm fishing in the winter for carp and for skimmers, but rather than using a light coloured ground bait like I would in the warmer months when the water's got a bit more colour in it, I like to use a dark ground bait, and I also like to use a sweet ground bait. This is perfect, and I've been using this a lot and catching lots of fish. What I do with this though, as I do with all ground baits in the winter, is I try to take some of the bigger particles out, just sieve it off and make it nice and fine. Just suits harder, more difficult winter fishing. So it's simply a case of opening the bag. You don't even need to mix it up or anything. So I just pop it onto a flour sieve and just riddle off the bigger particles, and it goes through very easily. And what you'll see is left is just absolutely lovely and fine, won't overfeed the fish, and it's ready to go. One of the problems you have in the winter time is with the low sunlight, and you get this shimmering bright sun on the water, and it can be really difficult to see your float. Now I use an orange top float normally out of choice, but when you get that shimmering light appear, a really good tip I find is to not just black your float out, but actually thicken your float tip slightly. It works both ways then to make your float easier to see. So what I have is I carry small pieces of cut black silicone, and they fit absolutely perfectly over a 1.5mm bristle. So I could see that float perfectly. The sun's come round, it's gone shimmering and bright, so I just literally slide that little piece of black silicone over the top there, and it thickens the bristle up and makes it black, and it's just so easy to see. So one of the things that I do always do in the winter to keep fish coming when it starts to get cold is just scale things down, even when I'm fishing for carp. So with elastic, you want it to be nice and soft, so you don't get hook pulls and you don't bump fish off. And the carp don't fight as hard in the winter, so nice soft elastics in combination with a puller, side puller, work absolutely perfectly. That's a 1.6mm hybrid elastic. When I'm fishing for more skimmers, I'd go even lower than that, 1.2 or 1.4mm, and it's amazing how many carp you actually get in on really light elastics. Likewise, floats and bristles, rather than the sort of 2 and 2.5mm bristles that I use in the summertime, I tend to use 1.5 or even 1.2mm bristles, and wire stems. That's actually like a titanium type stem, rather than sort of carbon or glass, just to keep everything nice and stable. You know, you obviously get quite a bit of wind and stuff in the winter time, so that all helps and aids in stability with presentation. Main lines, I perhaps scale them down slightly, but I don't get too hung up on main lines. I think what really matters is your hook lengths and your hooks. So hook length wise, rather than fishing with sort of 018, 019, 020 hook lengths like we do for carp in the summer, I'll think nothing of going down to 011 and 013 hook lengths with smaller sort of size 18 hooks, rather than the 14s and 16s and stuff that you'd use in the summer when you're fishing with bigger baits. So all of that scaled down balanced tackle will catch you everything that you need to catch in the winter, and just keep bites coming when it starts to get really tough. Another good little winter tip is to boost your fishery micros with sweet sensate. I love to do it. Very simple. Just pop some fishery micros in a pot, and all I do is I just put enough water in to the micros to just lap the top, not cover them completely, so they're just touching the top. Then I add this stuff, sweet fish accelerant. Need to give it a good shake before you squirt it on. Just make sure everything's mixed up. And then all I do is, while those pellets are soaking in that water, give them a good squirt of the sweet accelerant and mix that in. And as those pellets absorb that water, they soak in all the goodness of the Fuca Sensate fish accelerant. So one of the things that I do with my winter feeder fishing is I tend to switch from an open method feeder like that I'd use in the summer to get quite a lot of bait down and quick bite times, to something called a hybrid feeder, which, as you can see, has got sides on it. And when you're your bait's in the water for quite a long time, as it often is in the winter, these are ideal because the bait will stay on the feeder for a little bit longer. The beauty of this system here, this is a Preston type feeder, is it's attached to a stem, and with this universal sort of stem, you can actually slide that hybrid feeder off. So if it was a particularly good day and you did want to switch back to your method feeder, you can. You can also put bombs on there, so just a nice little bomb if you needed to fish a straight lead. But that system is so convenient that it's actually ideal to move and swap about with what you're doing. But I would definitely recommend, if you're going to be fishing with micro pellets on a feeder in the winter time, to use a hybrid feeder, because the bite times are going to be slower because the water's colder and the fish are moving around less than a method feeder. So tackle wise, I don't actually think that you need to scale your tackle down when you're fishing in the winter with hybrid feeders and method feeders. The fish, but with the nature of the rig, the fish will hook itself anyway, so still use nice strong hook lengths. You don't want anything to break, so a nice strong main line, 0.22, something like that would be ideal. Something that sinks. I've got a nice 10-foot Garbolino Essential feeder rod there, soft enough to avoid hook pulls, but got a nice bit of backbone to it. You never know what size carp you're going to catch. And I matched that with, because it's a 10-foot rod, I've just matched that with a 3000 size reel, so everything's nice and balanced. Lovely for winter fishing, that setup. So this is how you load a hybrid feeder for your winter fishing. Literally scoop some micro pellets into the hybrid and press them down like that, so they're level with the top of the feeder. Take your lovely little hook bait there and just gently press the hook into the bottom of the third of the feeder there, and then just cover it with those sensate pellets, and you're creating a lovely little trap there. Perfect trap to catch a carp during the winter months there. Another good tip for you when you're fishing in the winter to bring those extra bites on those cold, hard days is to use your Sensate Thick fish accelerant. Really does give your feeder a boost. Once you've loaded your feeder, literally just squirt some of that on the top. What fish could resist that? One of the things that I think is really important, particularly at this time of year, is fishing not just in your bait but around your bait, and how you feed your bait. So when you're catapulting your bait in, I think it's quite important that you try to make sure that your loose feed doesn't land past your float, that it lands this side of your float, And one of the other really good things to try is fish with a dolly butt on your pole, and you can actually fish past your bait. Quite often you'll find the slightly bigger stamp fish or the bonus fish will sit off your bait. So you can see it there on my pole. I've fed my initial ground bait on the end of my 13-metre section, and I've also plumbed the rig up to make sure that I can push it past my feed there on that dolly butt. That's a brilliant trick for picking off better fish and for keeping fish coming during the session as it gets harder. So, loose feeding maggots, especially in the winter. Don't want to put too many in, but the whole point of this is making something happen. So we take a small pinch of maggots there, lovely bright red maggots that have got the red sensate fish accelerant powder on them. How we go about feeding the maggots on the winter's day to drag something fish into your peg and make things happen. We take a nice little pinch of maggots, not too many because we're not trying to feed loads. We just aim is just to draw a few fish into the peg and make something happen. So we take a few maggots like that, lovely and red from the sensate powder. And so you don't have to put your pole down when you feed or feed before you ship out. This is how I like to do it, and it's actually to hold the pouch in my right hand and then push the catapult away from me rather than holding the catapult and pulling the pouch towards me. It just means that you can lay your rig in and then feed on top of your top of your float, sorry. Now, like I said before, you really do need to try and make sure that these maggots fall short, slightly short of your float. So it's a simple case of just gently popping them out like that. So pushing the catapult away from you while holding the pouch. Very, very easy, but something that makes life much easier if you can master it. So, winter elastic choice. This is another thing that really needs some consideration during the cold months. And what I would say is don't be afraid to scale down the elastic that you're using when it starts to get cold. For example, today I started off on a not a heavy elastic, still a soft elastic, but I thought I was going to be catching stocky carp and bream. It's not worked out like that. We've been catching lots of roach. So rather than bumping fish off, I've actually got up off my box, changed my elastic and put a nice soft elastic in. I'll still get carp in if I hook any carp, but this means that everything's much more efficient. I'm not bumping those silverfish off. They're important at this time of year. I'm not bumping them off when I'm shipping back. The elastic's working properly, and you're just avoiding those hook pulls. And you know, nice soft elastic really does make a difference. And like I said, don't be afraid to change it mid-match if you're not catching the fish that you thought you were going to catch. Scaling down can really make a difference. And another thing that I think is really, really important in the winter is being comfortable and warm. You must make sure that you're not uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable, you know, you're just not going to enjoy yourself and you're not going to fish properly. A nice warm hat, make sure you've got enough layers on, some nice boots to keep your toes and your feet warm. And another thing I always make sure I bring, because you can't beat it on a cold day, is a flask. A lovely cup of tea can really lift your spirits and make a difference to keeping you comfortable and keeping you catching and just making your whole day much more enjoyable. When you're fishing the feeder in the winter time, it can sometimes be a case of waiting a long time for bites. So it's important that your rod is set up nicely, you haven't got to hold it, you can keep your hands warm, you can be nice and comfortable while you're waiting for those bites. So I've got a nice little setup here. I can get my rod nicely positioned, I can sit nice and comfortable, I can have a cup of tea, whatever, while I'm waiting for a bite, and I'm not going to have my rod dragged in due to the type of rests and stuff that I'm using. And that's another really useful little tip for the winter. You could be waiting a long time for a bite, so make sure you can get your rod set up so you don't have to hold it, but it's safe and that you're nice and comfortable. Well, I hope you've enjoyed it. Lots of nice little tips on how to keep bites coming in the cold. Get out there and enjoy some really good winter sport.